let me start off by saying you're welcome, because we are diverging a little bit from the revised common lectionary text that would have us placed at the end of the world today. Because that's where Advent generally starts, is with the promise of the destruction of all things in Mark, or perhaps in Matthew, or maybe even in Luke. But we're going a different route today. We are going to explore birth. We are going to explore the story here in Luke toward the beginning. It seems to make much more sense to me to engage in this story rather than in the destruction or the possible coming of the end of all ages. So we are here in the beginning of Luke, and we are going to continue through Luke these next 4 weeks and then into Christmas Eve. So we meet here Zechariah and Elizabeth. But are we to understand this, friends, as a recounting of history? Well, if you were with us earlier, if you are in the 9 o'clock study, that Advent study that just started this week, because indeed it is the beginning of December, so every Sunday of December we're exploring this. This Sunday we began questioning these birth stories, these narratives, and looking back, looking even at Paul, the first writer we have in the New Testament. And you notice we're not starting with Paul. We're not reading something from Paul where Paul is talking about the miraculous birth of Jesus or even of John the Baptizer, the one who would become John the Baptizer. Why is that? Well, Paul doesn't talk about any sort of miraculous birth of Jesus, okay? That is not a big deal for Paul. So maybe these stories were told, were formulated, were created for a different reason. Maybe they weren't written. Okay, not maybe. I think it's 99.99999 ad infinitum % the case that these were not written or told to be understood as historical fact, all right? But these stories that, again, don't occur in Mark either, because Mark starts at the baptism. We only get some of these stories of Jesus' origins, his earliest origins, in Matthew and Luke. And we get a little bit more here in Luke because we get this story about John the Baptizer as well. So put the literal understanding to the side, okay? And let us see what meaning we might be able to pull, what meaning we might be able to ascertain, to draw from these stories, these texts that we have been telling, that our ancestors have been telling for hundreds and even thousands of years. Again, we have Zechariah and Elizabeth here. They remind us, perhaps, if we are fluent at all in our Bible, fluent perhaps in the Hebrew text, of two other aging folks who had gone without a child. Abraham, Sarah, perhaps. Perhaps they were kind of advanced in age, and then they were told they were going to have a child as well. It seems Luke, or our gospel writer, or the storytellers who were before this, that Luke was drawing on, our writer was drawing from, knew of this story. And we're trying to get some sort of way of telling people, of signifying to his community that there was something special about this one as well. John the Baptizer, whom some later historians, Josephus, a Roman historian, a Jewish Roman historian, seems to have focused on a little bit more than he even talked about Jesus. But this guy was special. This guy was something. This guy was perhaps to be the forerunner of something to come. Okay, or looking back, maybe he was the forerunner of something to come because we experienced something in Jesus. Because the adult Jesus embodied, like I was talking about with the children, the adult Jesus embodied, made incarnate, made real, this God of love, of hope, of justice, of peace. So these communities are trying to make sense of that, trying to relate that somehow, to describe that, to explain how this Jesus was special. So we got to talk about John the Baptizer first, because Jesus was a follower of John's. But also trying to make John is not the one that completely just set the stage for Jesus, but Jesus actually took over after John. He surpassed him in some way. So that's maybe where we get a little bit of the idea of a virgin birth, because what's better? What's beyond the birth from two aging parents? Well, a virgin birth, maybe. How can you top a virgin birth, right? We'll talk a little bit more about this next week, about this surpassing, but let's be right here. Let's focus in a little bit on what's happening with Zechariah and Elizabeth and their experience. We get that they're righteous. They have been just. They have followed in the ways of God. And given their age, it would be understandable to think that they had lost any sense of hope, that they would have an offspring, right? They wouldn't be trusting, anticipating, expecting for a child to enter into their lives. So what might this story relate to us today? They're in this state, this situation of this society that really, really values the birth of an heir, in particular a male heir. No chance. This isn't going to happen. Perhaps in a state of hopelessness, in a state of despair, in a state of just giving up. But God continues to work with them. God continues to work through them. God's work continues through humanity, is embodied in the lives of actual people. Okay, fictitious people, but here in our story, right? Real people, right here in this story, in these people's lives. God is entering in, and God is making a way where there seemed to be no way. God is inviting Zechariah and Elizabeth on a journey, inviting them to embody hope when all else seems lost, when all hope seems gone. This week, I had some visitors knock on my door. They were traveling as a trio, whereas usually these folks travel in pairs of two. They were LDS missionaries, knocked on my door, and they asked me, do you belong to any church? I have my First United Church sign in my front yard. Clearly they were not being super observant here. Maybe that was just the way they kick off their conversations generally. And I was like, yeah, I'm actually a pastor of that church, that sign that's in my front yard. And they continued asking me a little bit, and I told them, I'm not really interested in having a conversation right now. Thank you. And then they asked me a question. They asked, do you know anyone in this area who needs some hope in their lives? And I said, I think that's a lot of people these days. I think a lot of us may be feeling some of that sense of despair, some of that sense of hopelessness, because that trust, the children talked about faith. They talked about trust. That's what faith is trust. That something better, a vision for something better, that good can come. I think some of us are having a hard time receiving that, seeing that, perceiving that, experiencing that today. So this text speaks to me. And I think it can speak to us, many of us, who may, in our lives, our personal lives, in our communal life, our societal life, feel a bit of despair, feel like hope is gone, be wondering, is it really possible that we can make this world a better place? Is it really possible to establish justice? Is it really possible for us to love each other? Is it really possible for peace and well-being and shalom to be experienced in this world? Is that really possible? That maybe we're like Zechariah and Elizabeth, and we have lost that sense of hope. But here, a messenger, someone enters into Zechariah's and Elizabeth's life and sparks some hope. Indeed, invites them to trust that God is still at work in the world, even when things seem hopeless, even when all hope seems gone. I also wonder in this text about that piece, where it's like, well, this will be a sign that these things are going to happen. You won't be able to talk, Zechariah. What about that? It's kind of bizarre. Maybe Luke, our author, is drawing from some early Hebrew texts, from the book of Daniel in particular, perhaps when he was in the temple and then he wasn't able to speak, or he didn't speak. But I was considering what this might mean for us today. I thought about how when I am not speaking, I am listening much more. I am much more attentive to those around me. I am much more attentive to the thoughts that are going on in my head. I listen more closely to myself, and when I stop speaking, I open up space for the Spirit to move, for God to speak, to hear, to attend, to perceive the invitation, the guidance, the grace, the care, the comfort, the whatever it is God is offering me in that moment that may fuel my hope. That may invite me, encourage me, and inspire me that when I do speak again, when I do take action to embody hope in the world, to incarnate love and peace and justice when I stop and listen to those around me. When I stop and listen to the voice within me. When I stop and attend to the Spirit that is always, in each and every moment, calling out to me, calling out to you, to us, illuminating a path, encouraging our healing, honoring our belovedness. Friends, those are a couple of the pieces that I am drawing, that I am hearing as I stop to listen to these ancient stories. These stories that are rich and filled and packed with meaning. As we begin this season of Advent, of coming, of awaiting an incarnation, but not simply awaiting for that to happen somewhere out there or in one particular person, but awaiting and preparing and nourishing and nurturing that ability within ourselves and within our communities. How indeed are we being invited to embody hope, trust, faith, that vision for something better is actually possible. So friends, I'm going to invite you to a moment of reflection, a moment of quiet, a moment of listening, of feeling, of attending, of perceiving how God is working with and through you, continuing to think through who is it that you need to be listening to. Is it yourself? Sometimes, most definitely. Is it others? Are there particular folks in your lives whose stories, whose experiences you need to hear? Or perhaps even strangers whom you've not yet met, whose stories you need to attend to, whose experiences you're being invited to open yourselves to. I invite you in this moment, friends, to open yourselves ever wider to the presence of the divine that is here, that is here, that is anywhere and everywhere. Let us listen. Let us feel the movement of the Spirit. Let us be in the spirit of prayer, of meditation, of reflection, as we open ourselves to the divine presence in our midst. And so let us be together now for a moment